like to talk to you today about squares, circles, triangles, and X's. You can think of it mnemonically, like like the controls on a PlayStation controller. I'm assuming they still have those. I haven't played games in a long time, but I want you to think about it in terms of movement and structure. You see, circles. A perfect circle is the strongest flat shape because it has no hinge points to cave. Likewise, the sphere is the strongest three-dimensional shape, perfect sphere of course, because the surface has no particular give point. There's no hinge, there's no turn, it's just this perfect round object. Spheres you don't see too much in structure, though they do occur. I should say circles. We'll include spheres for simplicity's sake. But you don't see the circle too much in structure, more in motion. Then you have triangles. Now, why jump from a one-sided shape to a three-sided shape? Because there are no two-sided shapes. There are kind of not really any ways to do two-sided shapes. My wife is asking to come in, so I'm waving her in. I don't really care if she makes a little bit of noise. Anyway, so we jump from the circle to the triangle. The triangle is really best used as an application for foot movement in relation to another object. In martial arts, we think of it in terms of the center line, your personal base, the width of your shoulders, your hips, your feet, versus your center line versus your opponent's center line creates a triangle. Even in shooting, the isosceles triangle stance. The triangle is a very strong shape, and as you know, as far as man-made buildings go and everything, the tripod, the pyramid, the triangle is the strongest construct shape outside of the sphere. Then you have the rectangle. Now I'm saying rectangle. Rectangle can also mean square. Square is a type of rectangle, but I'm also adding in trapezoid. Really, trapezoid is not a rectangle. A trapezoid is its own separate thing, but not really, just kind of. Trapezoid is kind of like triangle meets rectangle. And as your movement complexity gets greater, more complex and evolves, you're going to find that these basic shapes apply in combination and in flow, and you can no longer pick out without great difficulty what shapes you're using. We're talking basics right now. So the rectangle is particularly good for strength and structure. That's your karate horse stance, or your kung fu deep horse stance. It is your squat. In a sense, it's your vertical jump. You are creating a wide base. You've got your rectangle from shoulders to feet. You've got rectangles from knees to feet. You've got a rectangle from toe to heel, horizontally on the ground. Rectangles abound. It's a stable shape. It's not necessarily particularly strong. It's easy to cave in, and it has tipping points and whatnot, as opposed to triangles and spheres. However, it is a simple shape to construct with your body. It's not very much a movement shape. It is more of a structure shape. Triangle is both movement and structure. Sphere is mostly movement. So right there you've got those. Then we're going to add in the X, because you're going to find yourself crossing the boundaries of these items constantly in your movement. You're going to find yourself cutting circles frequently, especially in terms of combat. You frequently will find that you have to cut a circular attack or a circular movement with a straight line. You're creating an X-type movement, a crossing movement. you're going to find that you may be in a very square stance, but in order to make a move, you have to cut across your own square. Or you may find that you have to shift and cross across your own square. X's apply to triangles as well. You know, there's 3 sides. I may have to cut across the hypotenuse, right? So it's crossing. And it doesn't, I'm not meaning necessarily a strict X. I'm just meaning crossing. I'm just using the mnemonic device of the PlayStation game system. Not owned by me, owned by Sony. Sony, don't sue me, thank you. Okay, but I'm using that idea to let you know that, that these things apply. And these are very fundamental structures and movement patterns that you're going to want to take a look at over and over and over again. And in your early stages of training, start analyzing your structure. Start analyzing where it's strong, where it's weak. I will tell you this, there is no such thing as a perfectly strong stance or a perfectly stable movement pattern. Everything has a weak point. Every time you move, you open yourself up in some other way. So whether you're doing martial arts, you're doing parkour, you're doing gymnastics, you're doing powerlifting, it doesn't matter what movement paradigm you're following. Analyze your structure. Analyze what you're doing. You know, is a square structure going to suit you very well for shooting a 12 gauge? No. I mean, unless you have incredibly strong shoulders and can hold 2 12 gauges in your hands and say, you know, let's be realistic. Just don't do that. You know, use the triangle. And does it have to be an equilateral or an isosceles triangle? No. You may go into a different kind of triangle. You don't have to visualize things as straight on you. You can have your center turned and the straight point be at another spot. We use slightly turned stances all the time. We use slightly turned approaches for obstacles in parkour. You don't see much turning in powerlifting, but say with a club bell or a kettlebell, there's all sorts of shifting and turning and popping that changes the structure. And like I said, as things go on and they get more complicated and you evolve with your movement, you're going to find compound versions of these structures, and things are no longer a simple square, circle, triangle, or cross, or X. You know, they're all sorts and everything and all in one and nothing at all, very amorphous. And that's okay. But you got to start somewhere. So start analyzing your movement patterns. Next time you're in the gym, throw an iron. Start thinking about what kind of shapes you're making. I hope you're not doing curls. It's not a very useful exercise. But if you are doing curls, think about the shapes that you're making. Here, you've got, you know, hopefully you can see this, but here you've got 90-degree angle with, you know, the hypotenuse and everything, the 45 degrees. And I'm not saying this is a perfect 90-degree angle, but you've got that. It's 90-degree angle. That's your point of maximum tension. As you lift, gravity starts to take over, and gravity starts pressing down into the bone more, and it takes some of the pressure off of the weight, taking the pressure away from the bicep, and oh, now all of a sudden you're past your full range of motion and you've collapsed into something completely different. You've still got a very small triangle, but it's no longer your muscle supporting the weight. So horrible example, I'm just using shapes to show you, not functional movement patterns. Squats are a really good example. You're creating a square and you're creating a new square as you go down. Once you get in and you start lowering down, now you're creating really a cube out of your hips, your knees, and you've got the invisible support underneath you. You know, if you want to draw the cube that way, you know, and in order to compensate for balance, guess what? You're leaning forward a little bit. You're creating a triangle with your upper half. Now you're creating triangular support on the top to make sure that the weight doesn't crush you. You know, obviously the more you tip, the more the weight presses down here, not over your hips, and then crunch and you die. You know, so you've got upper body, triangle, You've got lower body, some sort of cube or box form. It's a very simple motion, but you're already using multiple shapes, multiple forms. So just start analyzing. Start analyzing the shapes that you use, what's strong, what's not particularly strong, what is strong in one aspect, what's not strong in another aspect. Nothing is perfect. You will never create a perfect sphere, a perfect cube, or a perfect pyramid with your body. It's not possible. There's too many bumps and curves, and we're not made out of perfect lines. So think about it in terms just of structure. Don't labor over it too much. Start thinking about it in terms of structure. If your box starts to tilt, you're going to start losing stability. That's your base for your squat. Your box starts to tilt, and now you're falling over with 600 pounds or whatever. Same thing with shooting. You've got your triangle. You start shifting, you have to compensate, otherwise you're going to start turning with the recoil, provided you're not shooting something wimpy like a 22. Your triangle allows you to absorb shock from one point into 2 points. It's a very, very economical stance, if not a little open. Perhaps not the most tactical stance, but certainly a good static shooting, target shooting stance. Your sphere is really movement. It's moving around things. So when you move around things, try not to cut corners. Try to make your full circles, and then circle step around and get your motions that way. And then start thinking, what can defeat these shapes? Are you vaulting over something? What can defeat the triangle that you create between your hands planted on the wall and your feet in the air and the imaginary line between? Or what can defeat your squat? I already told you what can defeat your squat. What can defeat a hook punch? You've got a million data points. Simplify. Just simplify and start thinking of these shapes and dissect them. Think about them. Your body is a 3D thing. Don't think just in terms of 2D shapes. But your body is a 3D thing. And you need to move and you need to play in three-dimensional space. So just start thinking. Start thinking, start playing with your base, your center of balance, and your movement patterns, your leverage, your structure, all of this. But simplify down. 4 shapes. Sphere or circle, triangle or pyramid, rectangle or cube or box, and X or cross. Simplify down, get an idea for it, and then move on and evolve. Greater complexity over time. Till then, good journey.